Hi, my name is Lee Kreimer, and I'd like to welcome you to today's episode of Calling for Change, where we're really excited to be featured during the Lincoln Calling Festival 2020. So thank you for joining us. Today, our episode is What's Next, What's on the Line, and How to Engage Lincoln's Grassroots Organizers. And I'm really excited to be here today with three really awesome organizers from our community as a continuation of our conversation about civic engagement. So as a first step here, I'm going to have each organizer introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their movement. So Nicholette, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicholette Seigfreid. I work at Civic Nebraska, and I have the honor of serving as the president of the South Street Temple. And so that's where the majority of my organizing work happens, is within the Lincoln Jewish community.
Awesome. And our next organizer is Kinzie Mabon.
Hi, I'm Kinzie Mabon. My pronouns are she and they. I'm the field director for the Nebraska Civic Engagement Table. So my movement is everywhere. We are made up of almost 75 nonprofits across the state of Nebraska. So I've got my fingers in a lot of pots.
Awesome. And our last organizer with us is Kieran Wilson.
Hey, my name's Kieran Wilson. I'm a local artist and activist. I've been doing a lot of organizing with the Black Lives Matter movement independently, also working with a really awesome group of friends. I'm looking at kind of expanding the movement, moving into encouraging youth voting, encouraging civic discussion. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Sounds great. Thanks to you all for joining us today. So my first question is, how did you get involved in your organizing work and why is it important to you? So Nicholette, how would you answer that?
Sure. I started doing organizing work as a young person with the Jewish Federation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then just as I've gone throughout my life, just found various movements that I was passionate about and things I was passionate about. Did some organizing on my college campus around recycling, things like that. And then when I came to Lincoln and as a member of the Lincoln Jewish community, organizing within our community to take a stand against hate, especially in the past few years as anti-Semitism has been on the rise, figuring out ways for the Lincoln Jewish community to help educate folks about anti-Semitism, racism, all forms of hate, and how we can work to build a stronger community, to get to know each other, have that dialogue. So that's a little bit about my journey as a grassroots organizer.
Awesome. And Kinzie, what about you?
Yeah, I, like many people, kind of just fell into organizing. I too was pretty involved in my college campus, but I was also pretty active in high school. I grew up in Beatrice, where there were not a lot of people of color. So through that, I kind of had to advocate for myself and educate people. And then in college, it was around the time that Mike Brown was murdered and all sorts of things like that sort of kicked up. The Black Lives Matter movement kicked up for the first time. And so I kind of found my way through that.
Yeah, so my father has worked for nonprofit organizations his entire life. And so I used to go on like trips with him, kind of travel to these other countries and have an opportunity to try and be however impactful a middle school kid can be. But over the course of my life, I've just always found more and more and more opportunities to kind of step into roles to be impactful in my community. It's something that I'm really, really, really passionate about. And I think my first real step, like the point that I would say that I really feel like I became an activist, was during the March for Our Lives movement after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting. I just threw together an event with absolutely no plans. And when I say threw together an event, I mean I posted an event on Facebook, and within like 5 minutes there were 400 people going, and I started freaking out about okay, what am I going to do? But that was really my start. Yeah. So it's just been kind of like a gradual progression.
As a native of Lincoln too, I'm really excited that all three of you are with us today. Just because I have kind of separately seen all of your movements evolve and change and grow in the community, and I'm just really excited to learn more about what you've been doing. So, my next question is, I'd like to know more about how you build connections in the community. I know that connections are a really important part of organizing work, both more formally and informally. And so I'd love to know, how do you do that? What tactics do you use? And what do you think is really important while you navigate that?
I can speak a little bit on this. So the first, when we talk about organizing, sometimes I think people get really like formal about it. But in reality, it's just having conversations. I organize, well, I guess not anymore, and maybe in 5 years when we can go back to bars, but I organize in the back of bars all the time, talking to people about what they're interested in their community and ways that they can get involved. I talk to my neighbors, I talk to my friends. It really is just trying to understand where everybody's coming from and finding that common ground. And like I mentioned the other day while we were kind of talking, you can't be organizing if you're not building connection. That's just not how it works. You cannot organize in a silo. It just doesn't work that way. So building connections is incredibly important. And I don't want people to think that there has to be this like big, huge structure that they have to follow when it's really just, hey, how are you? Let's talk. What would make your life better? And just asking people that.
Yeah, and I can definitely add on to that too. For sure, what Kinzie said, of course, like organizing work doesn't happen without connection. So that's so critical to this work. For me, what my focus has been the past few years has been on building connections within the Lincoln Jewish community with each other. So just bringing folks together, figuring out ways to bring people together, to get to know each other better, to figure out like what are our shared values, what are our community values, and then how do those connect to the larger Lincoln community so that we can have a voice in, at the city level with advocacy efforts on policy change, things like that, how we can also just help add to conversations about race and racism and anti-Semitism in our community, how we can support other people who are experiencing hate. So that's really been the focus I've had, is just really building a strong Lincoln Jewish community internally, getting to know each other, thinking about those shared values, and then thinking about how we connect to the larger Lincoln, the community of Lincoln. And then, of course, bigger than Lincoln too, but that's really been the biggest focus for me, is like internally, how are we connected to each other? Not just knowing each other, but really knowing each other and asking some, not like super big questions, but just a little bit deeper, right? Just really thinking about what does tie us together and what do we believe in and what are our values and our vision for our community as a whole.
Yeah, just to jump off that, I like what you were saying, about seeking out like your kind of like localized community. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize they have the power to do is, seek out a need that you have, seek out something that you don't have and that other people don't have, and come together and acquire that, So I'm speaking more specifically from an arts perspective. Some friends of mine, we wanted to shoot film photography. We didn't have a scanner. We knew that would save us money. So we teamed up, put money together, and bought one. It's a really good way for you to organize, engage, build a community, because that there are needs out there that aren't being met. And by coming together, by working together, we can meet those needs. And I think it's also important to acknowledge, like, this can happen at different levels. I mean, as you're saying, you can have these conversations in the back of a bar, you can have conversations with your family members, or you can go show up to a city council meeting, you can speak, you can invite your friends out there. There's so many levels to this hierarchy. And, I don't want to go after people for not getting involved, but what I will say is, like, there are so many ways for you to be involved. So there's kind of no excuses. But yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it. Find something that ties a group of you together and come together and, make something happen.
As kind of a follow-up to this question too, I'm wondering, as everybody knows, we're in the midst of a public health crisis. And so, we're not having a lot of those same points of meeting that we had before, maybe with events in the community or tabling or other opportunities like that. as much. And so I'm wondering, how have you been able to continue to reach new people and engage more folks despite some of these challenges?
Well, I think things like this right now, this is going to be my second of 3 like Facebook live events in the last like 2 or 3 days. And I think that that's really cool, right? Like Facebook, you don't have to like sign in. You don't have to like pay for stuff. You don't have to like do any of that sort of stuff. You don't even have to like walk anywhere and show up. You can just sit on your couch. And I think that that's helping people get more engaged, especially in this time where I think people are feeling a lot of fear and rage and not really knowing what to do. And it's hard to like find a way to channel that energy when we can't go meet in person. And I think that it was really nice to do like the marches and rallies and things like that, and having the opportunity to be around other people with masks on, but trying to take care of ourselves at the same time while being with other people. There are ways to get together, but it's really important, especially right now as things are sort of going up, that we find ways to interact. And also, I am in so many new group chats. I don't even know how I got added to some of them.
Yeah, I think social media has also been, we know that it's always been a really powerful tool to bring about change. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing as a shift is kind of like our culture is becoming more comfortable with this concept of speaking on these issues. I think if you ask people, like 2 years ago, hey, would you post this this conversation about white supremacy, they probably wouldn't say this up front, but would think, I don't know if I want this on my feed. I don't know if I want, the people that I follow to interact with me in this way, or, the classic, oh, I don't really do politics. But now I think that's shifting. I think we're starting to hold each other accountable. And so I've met a lot of people through that, through people sharing things that I'm sharing, or through just having conversations. In that same vein, I've met a lot of people that I don't necessarily agree with, but working to have civil discussions over the internet. That's another really cool way that I think that we're able to navigate this within the pandemic.
Yeah, so one of the things I've worked on is the Together One Lincoln initiative, which is about having conversations about race and racism with friends, neighbors, family members, people you work with, people you're in other communities with. And all of that work is happening through Zoom or other technology tools, streaming tools. So we're hosting facilitator trainings in partnership with Inclusive Communities, and those are happening via Zoom. We're hosting community conversations. Some of those are Facebook Live. Some of them are, hosted through other means. But yeah, that's just really coming together through technology. And I will say, for me, I've been doing this work for several years now in Lincoln, and the attendance level is so high. And I think it is because there aren't barriers to showing up somewhere. So part of it is great to be able to have it, through Zoom or something like that. People can join from home, because I've seen more and more people showing up than I've ever seen in the past few years. And obviously there's things that are changing, but there's also just an ease about it too, which is really nice.
So kind of to go maybe a slightly different direction with this, I liked what you said about, the accessibility. People are able, there's less of this threshold that you have to overcome to get to something. I think that as winter comes, and as the pandemic gets worse, it's important for us to work to kind of find ways that we can be impactful without being in proximity. Because we were just talking about going to marches. You can be outside, you can be socially distant, you can wear a mask. In the winter, I still intend to march, but I don't know, a lot of people might not. And so I think that that's going to be kind of what we're going to see from the movement going forward. I have been having discussions with some other organizers kind of about that, how can we be impactful when we suddenly can't be outside? So I think it'll be really interesting to see. Do you all have any ideas though? I'm interested in a little brainstorm here.
I mean, I'm kind of an OG organizer, so I've had to walk in snow. You can walk in snow.
Yes.
Kind of how I see it. But I think just finding more engaging ways to do internet stuff. It's hard because we've all been trying to be creative over the last however many months we've been inside, which, by the way, is not my favorite way to live my life. I knew in March this is not going to be great for me, but just finding other ways to engage and finding ways to talk to each other. I would really like to see more like community spaces as opposed to just like organizing spaces or activist spaces where like you're not necessarily asking people to do stuff. You're just asking people to be together in a digital space. My dog just came running and is now under my legs, but yeah.
I think that's great, Kinzie, what you're saying for sure. I'm happy to be out in all weather, but yeah, definitely not everybody can do that. And some people just don't want to do that, which is fine. Maybe a little bit of thinking about where people are already gathering. So I think about, working with youth. So after school programs, like they're already together. Is that a space where we can plug in to think about engaging, younger folks? Or maybe potentially through some sort of like shared meal or like coffee meetups, like you were saying, Kinzie, just not about a specific ask or even a specific framing, but just being together. So like, is it just like a virtual like coffee hour or something like that, or a virtual happy hour if that's your thing, or so a way to share a meal together and have that kind of around the table discussion where everyone's at their own homes doing that with a streaming device. I don't know. I think those all could be fun ways to engage folks this winter.
I love that. That's a really great idea. And I think I've even, I've done the meal thing with a couple of people. And while it's kind of weird to watch other people eat, like there's something really comforting about doing that simultaneously and having discussion at the same time. It's, it's something I miss, and it's been really nice to be able to do that. So.
See, I'd just be bummed like watching someone eat a better meal than what I made for myself, which is probably what would happen. So
then why don't you ask a friend to teach you all how to make their favorite meal? I mean, like that
true.
Would be super fun to do. Be like, here's the shopping list. We're all going to get on, and I'm going to show you how we cook this.
Yeah.
That'd be something I'd love to do with my friends because, some of my friends can't even boil water.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just hop on and just watch people eat. I'll just sit there, no food, just sit there and watch them.
Brings you closer together. So, so as we're talking about, navigating COVID-19, but also thinking through your experience of just being an organizer, getting into the movement, all the lessons you've learned through that time, what are some things that you've learned either in the more recent past or since you started that you wish that you'd known, and something that you think is important to share with other organizers?
One of the biggest lessons that I've learned in this movement, I won't go into details of it, but really early on, there was someone that was like upset with what I was doing. It was kind of voiced to me in a way that, was kind of hurtful. And at first I was like very upset about it. I was like, no, this is wrong. This is not fair. I'm trying to do the best I can, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I had like a weekend where I just, stepped back, thought about it. And I realized like, we are all capable of making mistakes. Nobody is perfect, and you can't walk around with this mentality that you are, because the way that like hurting someone works, or the way that offending someone works is that you don't get to decide if you hurt someone or offended someone, And so like I spoke to that person, we reached like a better standing, but I was really an impactful experience for me, because I think, in the future, if I'm confronted with a similar situation, the first thing I'll do, rather than be upset with the way something was expressed to me, is look at what someone was actually saying. What things are true? What do I need to work on? How can I be better? I think that it was just kind of this thing where, you are setting out to do so much good, and you're putting so much time and effort into things, and you feel like someone doesn't necessarily understand that. And sometimes that gives you a big head, And so I think definitely keeping in mind that we're always capable of making mistakes. I think that that's something that was really instilled in me from that experience, and that I will carry going forward.
Yeah, I have learned 800,000 lessons. I think if you're not learning lessons, you're not actually like participating in life. One of the biggest things that's a part of my job is that I hire and train organizers every year that then go work for nonprofits for a year, like on contract. And one of the most important things that I teach, I think, There are a couple, but one of them is like, not everybody's an organizer, and that's okay. It's okay to like be an activist without being an organizer. Organizers at their core are people who unite and move people based on a common thread. I would say activists are people who participate in those movements. And you know what? That's okay. Being an organizer is actually not being a celebrity. And if someone is behaving that way, be very wary of them. Because the reason they're behind into the work may not be the ones that you feel. And then kind of along with that, I want to say, like, when it comes to organizing, it's really important to remember that it's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about the community. It's about the people. It's about 7 generations in the future. It is not about whether I feel like things are done perfectly. I'm a big believer in done is good enough. If it gets done, then it's good enough. So long as we are trying to be equitable and inclusive and all of those things, of course, but trying to control how everybody else does things or trying to be the face of a movement is not worth your time, because that's not what's going to get the work done. And I think along with what Kieran was saying, like, everybody's going to mess up. You're going to mess up. People mess up. You're going to fail. And it wouldn't be human if you didn't. So I think a lot of people who get into organizing want everything to be perfect and want everything to be done right when they do it. And this is the first time and the only time we're going to have to do this. But that is not true. It wasn't true in the 1900s when the labor movements started. It wasn't true in the 1960s with the Black liberation movements. It's not going to be true now. So those are kind of the lessons I learned.
Yeah, totally agree with everything Kieran and Kinzie have both said. I think when you do this work, there are some people who do get upset with you, and sometimes that's just because they disagree with what you stand for, and that's okay. I think I really try to focus on learning and a little bit of teaching, right? Like, I want to just be very, like, learn so much more, and like, that's my focus, share what knowledge I can share, but my primary focus is really learning. And definitely, I see as a parent, so much of why I do the work and why I want there to be a thriving Jewish community in Lincoln is because I have 2 children who are part of that community, and I want there to be community for them, and I want them to feel like they have a voice and a place here. And so I'm not doing this work for me. I love being a part of it. I love being a part of this community, and I want to be a part of a thriving Jewish community too, but I really want to do it for all the people that come after me and for all the people that are a part of my community. I mean, I love being able to see people come together and to be stronger together and to recognize that we have a powerful voice together. And when we get to have when that happens, it's so beautiful to watch. And it's not because of me, it's because of all of the people coming together and doing that work together and being connected to one another. And I think that that's the part that you have to really think about, is like stepping out of it from yourself and your own perspective, and really always staying teachable, and really making sure that the focus is the folks that you're working with, and not yourself, because that could be a trap that you could fall into for sure.
Yeah. Another thing I just wanted to add, this is kind of not something necessarily that I learned from organizing, but I think it's one of like the biggest lessons that I've learned in my life. I went to this talk. It was part of the Ian Thompson Forum at the University of Nebraska at the Lead Center. And this gentleman, David Brooks, he's a columnist, conservative columnist with the New York Times. He was speaking. And when I was on my way there with my family, I was kind of like, oh, conservative columnist, like, no, thank you. But I was being closed-minded, and that speech, that presentation, it really opened my mind. He spoke on kind of this mentality where we're like, why do people vote against their own best interests? And he said, people don't vote against their own best interests. We have a different idea of what their best interests are. And so the lesson that I learned from that is that if you want to have a conversation with someone, or an argument or discussion, it's more important that you acknowledge their perspective, where they came from, how they've established their beliefs rather than what they believe. Because at the end of the day, we're rational individuals. We act rationally, we believe rationally. Just as true as all of your beliefs are to you, someone who disagrees with you, those beliefs are true to them. And so trying to combat it from your position, the things that make you're right, is never going to be impactful. And then additionally, you have to be aware that there are some things that, you know, you're not right about, or that no one's right about, that the stance is not rooted in something where someone is factually good, someone is factually bad. You know, there's not this black and white in the world that we like to believe there is. And so I think that if we all did a better job of being aware of that, you know, and it's not something I'm good at. I'm still working on it. Like, I still have my prejudices with people that like have a different political ideology than me. But if we all work from that standpoint of like, I'm going to understand people's experience rather than just be mad at what they believe, I think that that would really, really, really help us bridge some of the divides that we're seeing right now. And so I guess the way that I learned that lesson was specifically from that talk, but kind of the manifestation of my mistakes was getting in petty arguments on Facebook, you know, back when I was in middle school, high school, sometime in college, and maybe even sometime in the past couple weeks. But getting in those petty arguments, you know, because at the end of the day, you start to realize these are self-serving. Like, I'm trying to dunk on somebody, you know, and when you dunk on someone, you get points. They don't get any points. So you're doing it just for yourself, which is bad. And so, yeah, I think working on that, you know, we talk about people need to work to get rid of like internalized homophobia, to get rid of internalized racism. You know, we talk about all these things that we have that we internally struggle with, and how, you know, these other people need to deal with it and fix that. I think that something that we all also struggle with is this internalized ideological discrimination. You know, we perceive all of these things in someone that might not even manifest themselves in them because we associate it with this other characteristic, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think working to break down that structure and be more self-aware is also a lesson that I've learned and have been working on.
That's so good, Kieran. I love that. And one of the ways I think about that is really thinking about, like, am I coming with demands and saying, like, this is what we're doing and like this is what we need to do? Or am I coming to the community and saying, okay, like, let's think about, like, here's this challenge we have. Let's think about how we can solve it together, and like what are our values that we share, and not telling them what the values are, even if I think I know, because I'm a part of the community and I think I know what our values are, like not doing that, right? And just taking that step back and just asking those questions and giving people space to like actually just come to those values themselves and those ideas themselves and share that. And I think that that's just a completely different framework than what I had done for so long, which was like coming and saying, we care about this thing, this is what we need to do, right? Like coming with the solution and why is not always very helpful. And I think when you're dealing with people outside of your community, that's the same framework, right? So like getting to know them, what do they actually value, having them tell you that, not telling them what their values are, for sure, is so incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and I agree with all the things that have been said. I just want to add, so my perspective and where I come in, or how I come into these conversations, is like to always make sure that I am coming from a place of love, even though, like, I am a temperamental person. I've got a temper. I'm hot-headed. I am loud. I get all up in my feelings. I know this about myself, but that's fine. But I come from a place of love always, and I come from a place of respecting everybody's humanity and their like right to live in their own dignity and their full dignity. And when you do that, it becomes a lot easier, and you like pull that into yourself. It becomes a lot easier to have these conversations with people and say, you know what? I didn't think about it that way, and I may disagree. I mean, there are some things that we disagree on that like are like the humanity of other people, and I'm not gonna move on that. But like there are some things where it's like, oh, property taxes or whatever, that I'm like, you know what? I never maybe considered it that way. Let's talk about like why that's a problem for everybody and figure out a way together to come together to do something for everybody, and trying to convince everybody of this like greater good, because that's going to be more useful in the long term than saying, oh, like, you know, you're the property tax people and you're like, blah, blah, blah. It's way easier to actually find common ground based on humanity and love. And I don't feel like that's a thing that's actually taught to Americans at all. We're not really like taught empathy. We're taught about like individualism and things like that, and trying to break down the barriers of that so that we can actually get the work done and we can actually build community is like the most important place for me to start.
I think this is kind of in the similar vein of what you were saying, but I think another really important thing is, you know, you're talking about property taxes and being willing to like hear out another perspective. Oftentimes the people you're communicating with are not the best people to understand like that belief, at the end of the day, we're not all the best orators. We're not all the best at using words to vocalize our beliefs. And so seek out information that contradicts your beliefs. If you're afraid to do that, then surprise, like you might be wrong. If you're afraid to actually challenge your belief, if you're afraid to look up the best argument against what you believe, then you're afraid that you're wrong. And that's a problem. We can't just kind of walk around with these blinders on to information that might actually challenge our beliefs. We have to be willing to learn and grow. And, one of the most impactful manifestations of that for me was working with the March for Our Lives movement, working with high school students from around Lincoln. We were doing research into gun laws and trying to find a more moderate stance that Nebraska could do to, push this conversation forward. Like, where can we get started? And in doing that, we did so much research. And I remember having one meeting one morning with all of these students, and they were talking about the Second Amendment and all the research they've done and how it kind of had impacted their perspective on it. And that to me was such a cool experience. Like, I learned so much from those kids because they were so willing to continue to teach themselves, continue to learn. And so I think that's an awesome thing too, is always be a student, always be willing to take in that information. It's really awesome. I love working with kids because of that. They're so willing to learn. So,
Thank you so much for all of your thoughts on this. So interesting. Kind of shifting gears here a little bit. So we've talked a lot about the tactics you're using, how you're connecting with people, how to mobilize more folks. Not surprisingly, this takes a lot of personal energy, and burnout is a real concern for organizers. So how have you experienced burnout, and what do you do to mitigate that? What kind of self-care practices do you have in your own life?
So I'm going to speak on this in kind of two ways. One as someone who employs organizers and wants them to be okay. And the other is a person who has experienced burnout myself. My first full-time paid organizing gig was in the fall of 2016. And I worked every day for 2 months between 8 and 14 hours with no days off. That was not great for my mental health, but there's this expectation that organizers, especially organizers who do it for money, are supposed to spend 80 hours of your week doing it. And if you get sick, buy 2 bottles of Robitussin, take 1 day off, and then you're ready to go. And that is just, I came up in a culture like that. And as an employer, I'm just really not interested in watching my staff do that at all. And I'm blessed to work in an organization where our executive director is also an organizer and came up as an organizer. So we have 4-day, 32-hour, I want to clarify, because sometimes you say 4-day work weeks and people are like, oh, you work 4 10s? And I'm like, haha, no, I would not. I'm too tired for that all the time. But, we have a shorter work week, and that leaves me Fridays to do yoga and go to therapy and all of these things and spend time with my friends. And, I was really looking forward to spending my Fridays getting pedicures and manicures, but now I'm not doing that because thank you, pandemic. But that sort of, oh, I love it. That's sort of literally just the basic stuff. I also cook for myself a lot, and that might be work for some people. I totally get that, but I love to put on music and just dance around my kitchen or put on a spooky podcast and be afraid in my kitchen and make sure all the doors are locked, but still be cooking dinner. And so for me, that's my self-care as an employer, someone who manages organizers. In every check-in, I'm asking people how they are. On a scale of 1 to 10, how whelmed are you? If I see someone at a 10, I'm like, all right, we're planning your vacation. I don't even want to talk about work. Let's look at the calendar. When are you taking days off? I'm going to clear them right now. I help someone book holiday, the Holiday Inn. I help someone get tickets for the Jonas Brothers concert last year. That is your responsibility as a person who's moving through this work. And I know that, y'all are maybe not people who employ organizers, but you might someday. And so people watching and people in this panel, I just really want to make sure that yes, we talk about self-care for ourselves, but it's also an institutional problem. And I think that that's something that I would love to see people advocate for themselves more, and for people who have the power to actually deal with, instead of just being well, I did it. Well, that's that doesn't mean anything to me. I I'm not interested in forcing people to do the horrible things that I had to do, you know? So, yeah.
That's also great, Kinzie. I will speak to this as just an individual. I think just really normalizing self-care and fun things, whether it's hanging out with friends or getting your hair done. I'm definitely missing getting my nails done. Kinzie, this pandemic has been sad for my nails. That was like the one New Year's resolution I kept, and I kept it for 2 years. I made a resolution to get my nails done, and I did it. So anyway, now I'm not doing it, and I'm like, But yeah, so normalizing just fun stuff too, because it can't just all be the work, I think is so critical. And then for me, I work in human resources at an advocacy organization. So for me, I really want to be sure that we're normalizing taking time off of work. We offer unlimited time off, which is great, and making sure people are actually taking the time off and checking in with them and asking them how much time have you taken off? When are you planning to take time off? And finding those ways to support them in that work too, and giving space to have community at work, and normalizing those tough conversations people have to have, or sharing difficult feelings or having emotions. I think that that's something that I've seen really come up a lot in human resources discussions during the pandemic, is making sure that it's okay. People can have emotions at work. I've been working since the early, since 2001 is when I started my first job. And I think when I started working, you couldn't be emotional in the workplace. There was just this idea of you don't have emotions when you're there, and you could never cry, and or be upset or any of those things. And I'm not talking about being disrespectful to people, but just being able to show your emotions, I think, is so critical. And so I want people to be able to have that emotional intelligence in the workplace. And I think it's critical to the advocacy work, because it's really difficult work. And so there's that. And I think as a leader in an organization, you have to model that behavior and take that time off yourself, and not put in all the hours. And sometimes you do have to work long hours, right? But then how do you recoup that time? And for me, as having kids, I want to be present with my kids, and I want to spend time with them, and I want to do that as well. And I don't want to just be doing work all the time. So those are the things I think about for self-care.
Yeah, and then, I should say, first of all, we need to have a nail painting sesh. We can hang out. That'll be our self-care. Have a little meetup. Yeah, so I think that one of the most important things for people to kind of be aware of is how much energy are you wasting? Are you operating at a capacity where you're no longer at 100% because you don't have energy? You have to be aware of that, because at the end of the day, all we are is a pool of energy, and I always bring this up, but the Martin Luther King Jr. quote about the moral arc of the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It is our job to all try and bend that, and you're a pool of energy, and if you're not using your energy right, that's wasted energy, right? We're not going to be able to bend it as far in our lifetimes. And so I think that avoiding the burnout by being aware of how am I placing my energy? Am I arguing with a family member that I've been arguing with for 10 years and they've never once seemed to concede anything to me? Is that a good use of energy? I'll let you decide, but in my eyes, it's not. Or another thing is okay, what if there's a march every day next week? Should I go to every single march every single night? No, that's not always the best way to use your energy. So I think just being aware of that and being comfortable with taking a step back, or figuring out something else to do. It's okay to get tired of the same routine, switch it up. I will say for me personally, one of my biggest motivations is the work itself. And so I think I have a pretty far threshold for getting burnt out, but I still do get to that point. And so one of the things that I try to do to avoid that is I give myself wins. I'll organize something that I know is going to go the way that I want it to. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll just organize an event. We had a bike march. When was that? 2 weeks ago, where we rode around giving out supplies to the homeless. We had a little talk. We all hung out, sitting outside of Pepe's and Juju's. Yo, everyone, go spend money at Pepe's and Juju's. But yeah, and so it was just a really nice day. And you're still being impactful. You're still having these conversations, but you just know that it's going to go right. It's not going to the city council and trying to propose something that you really, 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 really think is important, and then having them not take interest in it. you know you're going to get that win. And so I think that's another really awesome way to kind of avoid that burnout, is to give yourself those wins. You know, do some activist work that just feels good, and it's going to be successful no matter what.
Absolutely. I just want to touch on two things that both of y'all have said that just made me think of things. But yes, give yourself wins. Absolutely. Living in joy is actually a radical act. And I think sometimes people forget that you can do this work and see all of the things going on in the world that are frustrating and sad and rage inducing, but still be happy and being with people that you love, being in a community that you love, doing things that you love. So live in joy at the same time that you're trying to do this work, because that's going to help recharge your batteries so much. And then also talking about being aware of when you're going to burn out is really important. But more important than that, I would say, is letting other people know. I think that's something we forgot to mention. It's just hey, reaching out. When I'm starting to feel burnt out, you better believe on my staff meetings, I'm look, I'm tapped out. Kinzie's done. I'm just going to be answering emails this week. I cannot add anything onto my plate. When I'm doing my personal stuff, my personal organizing stuff, I'm hey, y'all, can anyone take these couple things off my plate? And we do that for each other. That's love. And that's how an organizing network and your people network is supposed to be. So recognize those things in yourself and tell other people, because people are not mind readers and they cannot help you if you don't ask for it.
That is so important, Kinzie. Be your own advocate. You've built this beautiful community of connection. People will take care of you. People will hold space for you. So advocate for yourself and say, hey, I need this. And the work will still get done. People will, carry that load. That's just how this happens. And it's really beautiful when that happens. So just be sure that you do ask for it when you need it. That's the most important point, for sure.
Kinzie, I also like what you had to say about, living in joy and in love, because I think that's another really awesome way that not only do you help yourself, but you help other people. If you foster a community of love and joy around the movements, around the organizing that you're working on, it helps people feel encouraged. It helps people feel empowered. Additionally, people viewing from the outside, they want to come and be a part of it, or people who kind of oppose the work you're doing. It becomes suddenly harder to be against something that is inherently full of love, joy. I think that's really awesome. I love that a lot.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is winding down here. We'll have to be finished at 2:50 today, but any just last thoughts on how folks who are watching right now might be able to support the movements you're working on or connect further in the community? Just a couple ideas there.
Yes, there are tons of nonprofits doing texting, phone banking, canvassing, that sort of stuff, like Nebraska Appleseed, Heartland Worker Center in Omaha, Civic Nebraska, Out Nebraska. Tons of groups are doing work. And then also just make sure that you know who your neighbors are and live in love and love every person that you come into contact with.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. We timed it at the same time. My thing was going. Okay. Yeah. So what I wanted to say was, just continue to try to be the best ally you can be, the best organizer you can be. Just continue to try to do the best that you can do. And then additionally, understand kind of what I was saying earlier. You are going to make mistakes, and the best way to move forward after a mistake is first to acknowledge the mistake, second to apologize for the mistake, and third, to do better, to do better next time. And if you're willing to do those three things, then you're doing a good job already. And then specifically about actual specific ways to get involved. Yeah, there are a lot of organizations doing work, but I think one of the cool things is what do you want to do? How do you want to be involved? Make it happen. There's so many ways to be impactful. Once again, there's not an excuse for not being impactful in some way, because you can do it. So.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I just want to thank our panelists today for joining us and for this really interesting, great time to learn more about your work and your experiences. And I just want to encourage all those folks watching today, get connected, reach out to the organizations that these folks are either working with or connected to, and please join us. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.